everybody, Wandering Curator Evan here. Did you know Abraham Lincoln visited Cleveland twice? Once right after he was elected president, and the second time after he was assassinated. We're going to be talking about that second visit today. Thank you very much for watching.
Surgeon General Barnes laid his finger to the carotid artery.
Now he belongs to the ages.
His work was done, and now he was going home. But this was his homecoming. And this was his peace and quiet. Yes, that was what it came to. That was the end of it all.
I'm here with Tony. Tony, what can you tell us about when Abraham Lincoln was here in 1865 for his, funeral train tour?
Absolutely. So President Lincoln's stop here in Cleveland was part of a much larger event as they transported the president's remains to his final resting spot in Springfield, Illinois, which is where his wife, Mary Todd, rather insisted that he be buried, in their hometown. So that trip was taken by train, and they stopped at various cities along the way, and Cleveland was one of those stops. It was going to be a point of transition. The train would have been coming in from Buffalo, New York, and then after the ceremony here, it was the casket was going to be taken down to Columbus, where he was going to lay in state, the State House there.
Now, obviously, this area has changed a lot since then. What was the setup like when they had the viewing of his body here?
So when they first received word that Cleveland was chosen as one of the cities where there was going to be a service and a viewing, they quickly put together a committee and then just as quickly realized that none of the buildings were large enough to handle the expected crowds. As a matter of fact, at the time, the city hall offices were in a building on the southwest corner of Public Square. They didn't have their own city hall. So they toyed briefly with the idea of building a pavilion or building a building, and they were like, we don't have the time for that. So instead, they'd opted to build a viewing pavilion. And that pavilion was built right out here on Public Square. You can see as Superior cuts across the square, you have the two bus stops. In between that, in the middle of the square, or in the middle of the road, is where they built this pavilion. And that would allow protection from the weather. They would be able to put the casket out, but it would also allow large groups of people to pass by on either side to come by and pay their respects.
Now, how long was Lincoln's body here in Cleveland?
So for less than a day. The train arrived in Cleveland about 6:30 in the morning, and then it was taken off of the train at about 7:30. And there was a procession that started over on East 55th. It went down Euclid Avenue till it hit East 9th. East 9th over to Superior, and then Superior down here to Public Square. Was placed in the pavilion at about 10 o'clock in the morning. They had a prayer service at that point, and first they let the procession go through. Everyone that was involved in the procession would stretch well back, back towards, even when the head of the procession was here on Public Square, the tail end was still back on Euclid Avenue. And then once the procession had gone through, then the waiting crowds could go through. And from the photographs we have, we know that before the procession even started, people were lined up around Public Square just waiting for their opportunity to come by and pay their respects.
Is there an estimate of how many people we think visited?
Absolutely. So we have pretty good documentation for at least 90,000 people coming here to Cleveland to pay their respects. And that was in about a 6 to 7 hour period, from 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the evening. However, they didn't actually end the viewing until 11 o'clock. And I've seen estimates that push it up over 100,000, maybe to 150,000. And what's even more remarkable is that it rained almost the entire day. And by the afternoon, it was a heavy rain. And yet people were still coming out to pay their respects to President Lincoln. So if they, both the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the Cleveland Leader, which were the two leading papers in town at the time, both of them said if it had been nice weather, the crowds might have even been higher than that.
Now, as I said, this area has changed a lot. Can you tell me about the one building that was here?
Absolutely. So if you look across the square, you see the old stone church. That building there was built in the 1850s, and it is the only surviving building on Public Square that was here when that funeral service happened out here on Public Square. And yeah, it looked a little bit different. The spire that you see there now, there had been a spire there that burnt down at one point, and so during the war it was just flat topped up there, and then they replaced the spire in the 20th century. But yeah, so the square does look remarkably different. At the time you had a statue to Oliver Hazard Perry right in the center. The four corners, there was an amphitheater in a corner, there was a pond in a corner. It was much more of at the time it was a green space, just an open space. There was no traffic allowed through, which made it the perfect spot to have a viewing like this, because there wouldn't be no interference, during the ceremony.
All right, well, thank you very much.
My pleasure, absolutely.